For 18 years I babysat without asking for a dime. Carolyn West, retired school secretary and neighbor since the day they moved in, never kept a tally. Lisa, the young mother who once cried on my porch for help, now told me to stay in my lane with a smirk. By morning, the lane and the strip of land their driveway sat on would be signed over to me fair and legal. I'd been both neighbor and caregiver. Now I was the owner of the ground beneath their wheels, and when the surveyor's stakes went in, they finally learned which lane I'd taken. I'm curious, where in the world are you joining us from? Drop your city or country in the comments, and make sure you're subscribed for all the latest updates. She didn't even say thank you, just dropped the diaper bag like it was mine. Gloria balanced her purse against her hip as she stepped into Lauren's foyer. The air smelled faintly of lavender cleaner, though a pair of sneakers lay abandoned in the middle of the rug. Before she could close the door, Lauren brushed past. Coat half on, lipstick still fresh. Quick favor, back by dinner, Lauren said, thrusting the diaper bag toward her without breaking stride. Brent was behind her, his cologne sharp and polished, one hand on the doorknob, the other adjusting his watch. Neither looked at Gloria long enough for her to reply. The door shut, and silence swelled. It didn't last. Upstairs, a baby's cry spiraled into full-blown wailing. Somewhere down the hall, a crash of Lego bricks followed by a muffled grandma. Gloria climbed the stairs, knees aching. She scooped the baby up, murmuring soft nonsense, until the sobs thinned to hiccups. The older boy stood barefoot in the hall, eyes wide, clutching a broken piece of his tower. The hours stacked themselves like unmarked boxes. She fed them, cleaned them, picked up toys only to see them scatter again. In between, she loaded a dishwasher, folded towels, and wiped applesauce off the floor. The clock on the stove ticked past noon, then past 2. By late afternoon, sunlight angled in through the blinds, throwing gold stripes across the kitchen table. Gloria opened the fridge, looking for milk, and stopped. 2 bottles of champagne gleamed on the top shelf, their corks wired like tiny crowns. On the counter beside her elbow lay a neat stack of travel brochures, all turquoise water and infinity pools. Her gaze lingered. She closed the fridge and found a handwritten list on the counter. Milk, eggs, laundry pods, almond biscotti. No mention of thanks. When the front door finally opened again, Lauren and Brent came in together, laughing at something Gloria couldn't hear. Brent's jacket was gone. Lauren's cheeks were flushed. "Everything okay?" Lauren asked, dropping her heels by the door. Gloria opened her mouth, then closed it. "It was fine," she said instead. Lauren's smile didn't reach her eyes. "It's not like you work," she said lightly, already halfway down the hall. The drive home was quiet, the hum of tires filling the car. The neighborhood passed in clipped lawns and uniform hedges until something broke the pattern, a leaning wooden sign on the far side of the road. "Lot for sale." The paint was flaking, but the phone number was still there. Gloria eased onto the gravel shoulder. Beyond the sign stretched a patch of uneven grass, bordered by old trees, their leaves the color of rust. Through the branches, the evening light spilled warm and low. She pulled the grocery list from her bag, flipped it over to the blank side, and the voice that answered was older, friendly, and quick to name a price. It wasn't small, but it was less than she'd expected. Her pen pressed the numbers into the paper hard enough to leave a faint emboss. She pulls over, dials the number, and scribbles a price on the back of that list. "They told me to stay in my lane, so I bought one." The woman's voice on the other end was thin but steady, the kind of tone people use when they've already made peace with letting something go. She gave her name, Mabel, and explained she'd been meaning to sell the lot for months. "Too much for me to keep up with," she said, "and I'd rather see someone actually use it than just watch it turn to weeds." When Gloria met her later that week, Mabel stood at the edge of the grass with a folded lawn chair under one arm, silver hair moving in the wind. She wore a faded denim jacket, and spoke like someone who'd lived long enough to know when a bargain was fair. The price she offered made Gloria blink. It wasn't nothing, but it was less than she'd feared. "I'd like it to go to someone who'll treat it kindly," Mabel said. "Not cut it up into concrete." Gloria heard herself say "I would," and she meant it. That night she called Denise. They'd known each other for 30 years, through PTA meetings, funerals, and the quiet Sunday breakfasts when neither needed to talk much. Denise listened without interrupting, as Gloria explained the cost, the size, the ridiculousness of buying land across from Lauren. "Do you have the money?" Denise asked. "Between my savings and the pension, yes, it's almost everything." Denise's pause was long enough to feel like a Then maybe it's time you spend almost everything on you. The words lodged somewhere deep. 2 days later, Gloria sat across from a notary in a modest office that smelled faintly of copier ink and lemon cleaner. The paperwork slid across the desk, each signature smooth under her hand. No mortgage, no cosigner, no one's name but hers. When she stepped onto the lot again, this time with the deed in her purse, the air felt sharper, cleaner. The strip of road that bordered the grass marked the official edge of the HOA's. On this side, there were no uniform paint codes, no committees, no rules about what could grow. Technically rural, Mabel had said. Technically free. Gloria drove 2 stakes into the soft earth and stretched a plank of wood between them. With a small brush, she painted in block letters, "Gloria's Lane, Children Welcome." The paint bled slightly into the grain, imperfect and alive. She propped it up at the entrance, the brush still warm in her hand. The ground here wasn't perfectly level, but she liked that. It rolled gently toward the trees at the back, where shadows pooled. She walked the perimeter slowly, her notebook open. A bench could go near the oak, maybe a table under the maple, raised beds along the fence. Her handwriting, small and careful, filled the page with shapes and arrows. The wind picked up, rustling the last leaves. Somewhere beyond the hedge, she could hear a car door slam. Lauren's, probably. Gloria imagined her pulling into the driveway and catching sight of the sign. That night, as she settled into her chair with a cup of chamomile tea, her phone buzzed. A text from Lauren, short and sharp. "What are you doing with land across from my house?" Gloria stared at it for a moment, the cursor blinking in her mind even though she hadn't opened the reply box. She set the phone down on the table, let the message sit unanswered. Outside her window, the lot lay dark and still, but it felt like it was already hers in a way no one could undo. She didn't check the phone again before bed. "Brent appears the next morning on her property without knocking. He stepped on my soil and called it inconvenient." Brent didn't even slow his pace as he crossed the strip of grass at the edge of the lot, dress shoes grinding into the damp soil. His shadow stretched long across the boards of her handmade sign. "This is disruptive," he said, scanning the property as though cataloging defects. "It doesn't fit the look of the neighborhood." Gloria kept her hands steady on the trowel she was using to loosen the earth around a stubborn root. "It's not in the neighborhood," she said evenly. "It's mine." He glanced toward the road as if the HOA might materialize behind him. "Technically, maybe, but this," he waved a hand toward the sign, "the stakes, the scattered garden tools, changes the whole feel when you come in the gate. That's not for you to decide." She stood, brushing soil from her palms. "I'm outside HOA control. You know." Brent's mouth flattened. "Lauren's not thrilled. Frankly, neither am I." Before she could answer, the sound of tires on gravel turned both their heads. Lauren's SUV rolled up, stopping at the edge of the property. She stepped out, sunglasses hiding her eyes. "What is going on here?" Lauren's voice cut through the quiet. "I'm preparing the ground," Gloria said. "I've got plans." Lauren folded her arms. "It's weird, Mom. It looks performative, like you're making some kind of statement." Gloria met her daughter's gaze. I'm making a place for reading, for learning, for care, somewhere children can feel welcome." Lauren's laugh was short. "You think the neighborhood needs that?" Before Gloria could answer, a flicker of movement caught her eye. From the sidewalk, a small girl in a polka-dot raincoat approached, clutching a packet of seeds. She couldn't have been more than 7. "Can I help?" the girl asked, voice barely above a whisper. Gloria smiled. "Of course." She handed over the trowel, guiding the girl toward a bare patch of earth near the fence. Brent stepped back, watching as the child knelt, tiny fingers pushing seeds into the soil. Lauren shifted uncomfortably, eyes darting toward passing cars. Across the street, curtains twitched. A man with a leaf blower slowed his work to glance over. Farther down, two women walking dogs paused to watch. Gloria could feel the curiosity gathering like a low hum, neighbors wondering what was happening, how it might change things. Lauren broke the silence first. "Don't drag the family into something petty, Mom." Gloria bent to pat the soil around the seeds, her voice calm. "This isn't petty." The girl looked up at her, and smiled. A gap where one tooth should have been. Gloria smiled back. Brent exhaled through his nose, turned and stepped back toward the street. Lauren lingered a moment longer, sunglasses still in place, then followed him without another word. By the time Gloria finished tidying the tools, the sun had dipped lower, painting the edges of the trees in gold. She walked to her mailbox, the one she'd had installed at the very corner of the lot. Inside, resting on top of a flyer for a hardware store sale, was a thick white envelope. The return address read HOA Board. A red stamp across the front marked it certified mail. A certified envelope appears in Gloria's mailbox, marked from the HOA board. The letter said, "You're harming the neighborhood aesthetic." I framed it. The paper was thick, embossed with the HOA's emblem in the corner, as if authority could be pressed into pulp. Gloria read the first line twice, not because it was unclear, but because the absurdity needed a second pass. Her activities, the letter claimed, were negatively impacting neighborhood cohesion and property values. The phrase "harming the aesthetic" was underlined. It was signed in blue ink by 3 board members she barely knew, people who'd waved at her from a distance, but never once offered her a cup of coffee. By the 3rd paragraph, the tone sharpened. Uniformity was essential. Her irregular structures an issue. It was as if the little handmade sign had been a threat to their very way of life. Gloria folded the letter, slid it into a cheap black frame, and hung it on the inside wall of her shed, just above the potting bench. With a piece of masking tape she labeled it "First Seed Plant." The next Saturday, she laid out a blanket under the oak tree and set a small stack of picture books in the grass. She didn't announce it, but by mid-morning 2 neighborhood kids had wandered over, dragging their parents behind them. She read "Blueberries for Sal" in a steady voice while a kettle of herbal tea steeped nearby. The following weekend, there were 5 children. One brought cookies. A father lingered at the fence, smiling in that polite way of someone not sure whether to step closer. It didn't take long for word to trickle its way through the invisible channels of the neighborhood. Some voices were curious, others less so. Lauren's made its way online. A post on her social media set to public described a certain drama-hungry retiree making a scene across from my house. She didn't name her mother, but she didn't have to. The comments filled with sympathetic clucks, suggestions to ignore the noise. Gloria didn't respond. She didn't have to, because 2 days later, a local elementary school teacher posted a photo of the lane on Facebook, her students sitting cross-legged in the grass, listening to a story. The caption read, "This is what community looks like." The image spread, shared, and neighbors from other streets dropped by to see it in person. A teenager with a camera took pictures for a school project. Gloria decided it was time for something official. She printed a flyer, "Reading and Tea with Grandma G," and pinned it to the bulletin board at the grocery store. That Saturday, she set out mismatched mugs and a tin of lemon cookies. Kids sprawled on the blanket, their parents clustered in loose groups nearby. She read "The Velveteen Rabbit," her voice carrying past the maple's shadow. After the reading, while she was pouring tea for a shy boy in a striped shirt, a woman in a wide-brimmed hat approached. She lived 2 doors down, Gloria vaguely remembered. Her voice was low, almost conspiratorial. "You know Brent tried to buy this lot a few months ago," the woman said. "Before you got it?" Gloria's hands stilled over the teapot. "He came to see it with the owner, Mabel. I think, she told me later she decided against selling to him. Said she had a feeling. Control issues, was how she put it." Gloria's eyes moved across the lot to where Brent's house sat behind its hedges. "Interesting," she said, the word as cool as the tea in her cup. The woman gave a small nod, as if she'd done her good deed for the day, and drifted back into the crowd. The gathering wound down by late afternoon. Parents ushered children toward home, carrying extra cookies wrapped in napkins. Gloria stayed behind, packing away the mugs, folding the blanket, the frame on the shed wall catching the last light of the day. She walked to her mailbox, expecting nothing more than the usual flyers and bills. But inside was a heavy manila envelope, the kind that makes you feel watched. In the corner, the return address wasn't the HOA this time. It was Brent's law firm. The word legal was stamped across the front, in bold unmissable red. A manila envelope arrives, marked legal, from Brent's workplace firm. They called it a cease and desist. I called it compost. The envelope had weight, not from the paper inside, but from the intention. Gloria slid it open at her kitchen counter, the scissors catching in the seam, and slid the pages out. The letterhead was glossy, the font severe. Brent's law firm demanded, politely, in the stiff, sterile language of attorneys, that she cease all public gatherings and youth-oriented activities on her property. Liability risks, safety concerns, unauthorized assembly, paragraph after paragraph, dressed the threat in formality. She read it twice, letting the absurdity settle like silt at the bottom of a jar. Then she called Marcia. Her attorney's voice was brisk, pragmatic. Zero jurisdiction, Marcia said after a few moments of scanning the emailed document. You're zoned rural. This doesn't hold a drop of water. They're calling it a liability issue, Gloria said, leaning against the counter. Then they don't understand the law, or they're hoping you don't. Keep your insurance current, post basic safety rules, and you're fine. Marcia paused. Gloria, this is posturing. Nothing more. The following morning, Gloria took the letter and slipped it into a clear sleeve. She nailed it to the gatepost at the lane's entrance, right beneath her hand-painted sign. In black marker, she scrawled a caption across the bottom edge of the plastic. Welcome to Lane. If Brent or Lauren saw it, they didn't say anything directly, but the neighborhood noticed. That weekend, more kids arrived than she had chairs. A couple of older boys set up a card table with a pitcher of lemonade, a handwritten sign 50 for a cup, free for helpers. Parents lingered under the trees, chatting with each other, the air scented with cut grass and citrus. By mid-afternoon, a woman with a camera around her neck approached. Local blog, she explained. Mind if I do a piece? She stayed for an hour, photographing kids chalking hopscotch on the walkway, parents leaning on the fence. 2 days later, the post went live, the lane we all needed. It was warm, unpolished and real. Lauren's reaction came swiftly. A curt text. The kids won't be coming over anymore. Safety concern. No explanation beyond that. Gloria stared at the message for a long moment before setting the phone face down on the table. She refused to answer in hate. The next morning, she overheard snippets of conversation from parents arriving early, mentions of the post, Brent being furious, media emails. The words hung in the air like the faint smell of rain before a storm. By Thursday she knew the post had traveled farther than anyone expected. 2 local radio hosts had mentioned it. A community newsletter requested an interview. A student journalist emailed asking to profile her for a class project. She spent the day planting pansies along the front fence, the bright petals opening toward the sun, when her phone rang. The number was unfamiliar. The area code from the city office. She wiped her hands on her jeans before answering. Mrs. Martin. The voice was polite, official. This is the zoning department. We've had some complaints. Gloria receives a phone call from a city zoning official. We've had complaints. They thought I was planting flowers. I was planting permanent. The zoning officer arrived mid-morning, a clipboard in one hand, sunglasses reflecting the neat sweep of the lane. Gloria met him at the gate, her palms still damp from rinsing watering cans. I'll be brief, he said, flipping through papers. We had some calls, but you're fully compliant. Zoning, safety, everything. Just be aware. Sometimes these things escalate when neighbors dig in. Gloria caught the slight emphasis on dig. Noted, she said, her voice even. After he left, she stood at the center of the lot and took stock. The bare patches begged for purpose. She brought in 2 weathered benches, sanding and staining them, until they gleamed under the afternoon sun. A donated picnic table followed, its surface perfect for coloring books and sandwich crumbs. Along the fence, She painted a stretch of plywood in thick black chalkboard paint, setting out a basket of stubby, bright sticks for anyone to draw with. By the weekend, the chalk wall bloomed with suns, stick figure families, and wobbly letters spelling Hi Grandma G. Next came the free little library. Denise helped her mount it on a post near the gate, its roof painted robin's egg blue. Gloria filled it with picture books, worn paperbacks, and a few gardening guides, the kind with glossy photos that made even the smallest plot look like Eden. It didn't take long for Brent to notice. The knock on her door never came, but an official notice did, this time from the county's records office. Noise complaint, it read, citing unauthorized youth activities and disturbance during residential quiet hours. The complaint was unsigned, but she didn't need a signature to know the source. She kept going. A few days later, Denise called from the grocery store, her voice tight, ran into Lauren in the baking aisle. She accused me of her words encouraging rebellion. Gloria pictured her daughter between bags of flour and sugar, lips pressed thin, voice pitched to Carrie. "What did you say? That friendship isn't rebellion," Denise replied, and I grabbed my coffee and left. That same afternoon, while Gloria was replanting the marigolds that had wilted in last week's heat, a tall boy in a faded hoodie stopped at the fence. She didn't recognize him immediately, but when he pushed his hood back, the face came into focus. Caleb, a teenager she'd once watched for a neighbor when he was small. "Don't know if you remember me," he said, voice cracking on the edge of manhood, "but you let me stay at your place once, when things were bad at home. I never forgot." Before she could answer, he pulled a folded flyer from his backpack. "I'm learning web design. If you want, I can build you a site, free." The next week, A Lane for All Generations went live. Photos of the chalk wall, the library box, kids reading under the oak, all neatly arranged with a calendar for events. The tagline read, "Open Hearts, Open Gates." Gloria clicked through the pages late at night, the blue light washing her hands as she scrolled. It wasn't just a patch of land anymore. It was a map of something growing roots she couldn't see, reaching into places she hadn't planned for. On Tuesday morning, she opened her mailbox expecting bills and catalogs. Instead, a single folded sheet of paper lay inside. No envelope, no stamp. The handwriting was tight, the message short. "We're watching you." They erased me from their family, so I carved myself into the community. The arch had been weeks in the making. Oak beams planed smooth, the lettering burned into the wood with a steady hand, then painted in bold weatherproof white. She set it at the lane's entrance early one morning, the grass still wet with dew, her breath clouding in the cool air. Gloria's Lane, 2006, forever. The year marked the start of the 18 unpaid years she'd given, the quiet tally that only she had kept. Forever was hers to claim. 2 days later, her former church group arrived with picnic baskets and folding chairs. They came bearing potato salad, fruit pies, and the kind of easy chatter that made the lane feel like an extension of someone's backyard. A few sang happy birthday off-key. Someone had brought a lemon cake with sugared violet. Gloria let herself be hugged, let the warmth of it settle into her bones. Children darted between the benches and the chalk wall. At one table, 2 old friends from choir debated which hymn belonged in the Sunday rotation, their voices carrying over the breeze. The smell of barbecue drifted from a portable grill someone had wheeled in. Midway through the picnic, a woman with a camera and notepad introduced herself, features editor for a local lifestyle magazine. She'd heard about the lane through the grapevine and wanted to do a profile. Gloria didn't pose, but she didn't hide either. A week later, the magazine arrived in mailboxes. Elder Power, Gloria's Quiet Revolution. The photo showed her standing beneath the arch, hands resting on the gate like it was the bow of a ship she was steering forward. She wasn't surprised when Lauren's comment popped up under the online version. "This isn't humility, it's performance." Gloria didn't reply. She'd learned that some words carried more weight when left unanswered. The next knock at her door was a courier, delivering a single-page notice on legal letterhead. Brent's firm again, this time alleging defamation of character over unspecified statements. Marcia handled it with one phone call. By the following afternoon, the notice had been dropped. Gloria suspected the magazine's request for comment had something to do with the sudden change of heart. Days later, on an afternoon thick with the scent of honeysuckle, she heard small footsteps on the gravel path. 2 of her grandchildren stood there, one clutching a wrinkled drawing of the lane, with Grandma G written in block letters, the other carrying a paper crown. They didn't speak at first, just wrapped their arms around her. She bent to meet them, inhaling the smell of crayons and sunscreen. They told her about school projects, the neighbor's dog, how much they liked the chalk wall. Gloria didn't promise sleepovers or special days. She didn't make any promises at all. She just listened, letting them fill the air with details she'd missed, details their parents would never think to share. When they left, she walked back under the arch, the late sun casting her shadow across the entrance. The lane hummed with the faint rustle of leaves, the distant giggles of children, and the low murmur of a neighbor sweeping her porch. That evening, after she'd locked the shed and shut the gate, she found her email inbox full of the usual newsletters and receipts, and one subject line that made her pause. A reporter emails her, "We're covering community power versus HOAs. Can you A news van parked next to the roses. My lane was officially real estate now. It was a quiet morning until the hum of an engine settled outside the fence. Gloria looked up from deadheading the roses to see the side of a van plastered with a local station's logo. The cameraman stepped out first, adjusting his lens, followed by a young reporter with a notepad and a jacket just a shade too warm for the weather. "Mrs. Martin, we're covering community power versus HOAs. Can we talk?" Gloria wiped her gloves on her jeans, led them to the bench beneath the oak. She didn't dress the moment up. "I just wanted a place where children were safe," she said into the microphone, voice steady. The reporter nodded, jotting notes as the cameraman caught the chalk wall behind her, still covered in yesterday's drawings of flowers and crooked suns. By evening the segment aired. Within hours it was online, passed along by community organizers, retweeted by elder care advocates, picked up by a handful of grassroots groups. The comments piled up, stories from strangers who had turned empty lots into gardens, or converted abandoned corners into reading circles. The ripple effect came quickly. A man from 3 streets over dropped off a set of gardening tools, their handles sanded smooth. A teacher brought a box of gently used children's books. Someone anonymous sent a sturdy garden bench engraved with her name, the letters deep enough to last decades. Across the road, Brent and Lauren's curtains stayed drawn. One afternoon, a neighbor mentioned a vague post they'd made online, something about boundaries and attention seekers. Gloria didn't bother looking it up. Instead, she focused on the lane. Denise was the mastermind. Lists, schedules, volunteers. She suggested booths for crafts, a bake sale, even a small performance by the elementary school's music club. "Open to everyone," Denise insisted, and Gloria agreed. Word spread fast, but so did resistance. The HOA board tried to rush through a zoning amendment, language that would make gatherings like hers subject to approval. Flyers appeared in mailboxes urging a yes vote. On the night of the vote, the small meeting hall filled with folding chairs and murmured debate. When the count was announced, the amendment failed. Gloria caught Denise's eye across the room. Neither smiled, but the relief was visible in their shoulders. The next afternoon, Gloria was restocking the little library when she noticed a familiar figure approaching, Lauren's eldest, Ellie. The girl's steps were hesitant, but her expression held something softer than the guardedness she'd seen in recent years. "I want to help," Ellie said simply, like regularly, "if that's okay." Gloria handed her a stack of paperbacks. "Start by putting these in the blue shelf," she said. They worked in companionable silence for the better part of an hour. By the time Ellie left, the sun was low and the air smelled faintly of cinnamon from the cookies cooling in Denise's kitchen next door. Later that evening, Gloria checked her mailbox. Inside, tucked between a seed catalog and an electric bill, was an envelope addressed in looping, careful script. No return address, just a single old-fashioned stamp in the corner. "Gloria receives a handwritten card from the seller who sold her the land," she said. "You bought the land I was supposed to have. I said, you had every chance." The card from Mabel was still on the table when Lauren appeared, unannounced, at the She didn't come alone. Brent trailed behind her, jaw tight, hands buried in his jacket pockets. Lauren didn't bother with pleasantries. "Why here?" she demanded, voice trembling at the edges. "Why across from me? You could have bought anywhere." Gloria set down the trowel she'd been using and rose slowly. "Because for 18 years, she said, her tone measured, "I was yours, now this is mine." Lauren flinched but recovered quickly. "You're making this about you. Always about you." Brent stepped forward, his shadow stretching across the chalk wall. "This family," he said, each word clipped, "is done with your circus." Gloria didn't move. "That's your choice," she said, "but I've made mine." She reached into her tote and pulled out a folded document, the edges softened from handling. "This," she said, "is my will. Updated last month. The lane will go to a public foundation. It will never be sold, never parceled off, and it will not pass to family." Lauren's mouth parted, her face a study in disbelief. "You'd give strangers your name, but not your blood." Gloria's gaze was steady. "Blood's not what matters. Roots are." The silence stretched between them, filled only by the rustle of leaves overhead. A few children's voices carried faintly from down the street, their laughter landing in the space like punctuation. Lauren looked away first. Without another word she turned and walked toward the road. Brent lingered long enough to give Gloria a look, something between contempt and resignation before following. Over the next weeks, the air between them stayed taut. Yet on Saturdays the grandkids started appearing, arriving in pairs or alone, sometimes with Denise's company, sometimes without. They planted marigolds, restocked the library box, carried pitchers of lemonade to visitors. Gloria didn't press them about their parents. She let the hours unspool naturally, the work shared without explanation. One chilly morning, while they were stacking folding chairs after a small reading circle, Gloria's phone rang. It was Marcia. Her lawyer's voice was brisk, but edged with something sharp. "Gloria, I need to tell you something. I pulled your property file after a routine records check. There was a petition filed to review your ownership on grounds of, and I quote, possible elder instability." Gloria's grip on the chair back tightened. "By whom?" "I can't say with absolute certainty without subpoenaing," Marcia replied, "but the signature matches Lauren's prior filings." The words landed like a stone in her chest, heavy but not entirely unexpected. "She did it quietly," Marcia continued. "The petition didn't make it past the preliminary review because your records are immaculate, financial, medical, legal. They had no case, but she tried." Gloria stepped out from under the oak into the pale winter light, the sound of the children's chatter drifting from the chalk wall. Her breath felt sharper in her lungs. Her attorney had confirmed what she'd long suspected. Lauren had tried to take the lane from her before it had even truly begun. She looked across at her daughter's house, the curtains drawn tight. "Gloria files a formal report for attempted elder exploitation. They tried to claim my mind. I filed to protect it, and everything I'd built." Marcia moved fast. Within a week the report Gloria filed had become a full case file, every letter, every bank statement, every photograph of the lane neatly indexed, copies of Lauren's petition, with its thinly veiled accusations about unstable judgment and susceptibility to influence, sat alongside Gloria's spotless medical and financial records. When the investigator came, he didn't linger on the formalities. He walked the lane with her, asking questions about its purpose, its funding, its future. At the picnic table he took out his notepad and said, almost as if to himself, "Your records are better organized than half the city offices I've seen." By the time he left, Gloria felt the knot between her shoulders ease just slightly. Denise's written statement arrived the next morning, folded in a pale blue envelope. Gloria read it twice, before tucking it into the case file. "She's more stable than anyone else on that street. If anything, she's the one keeping the rest of us from losing our heads." It made her laugh, but the warmth of it stayed with her. That Saturday, she mounted a new plaque on the inside of the arch, just above the gate latch. The letters were carved deep into cedar for those who stayed kind. She ran her fingers over the words, letting the grain catch against her skin. 2 days later, the process server arrived, neutral expression, envelope in hand. Lauren and Brent were officially served, cease interference or face legal damages. Gloria didn't need to see their reaction to know it landed like a stone in still water. The lane carried on. In the middle of the week, a woman from the next town over stopped by with a suggestion. She ran a small children's bookstore and wanted to host monthly book drives through the lane. "You've already got the audience," she said, eyes sweeping the chalk wall, the library box, the benches, and the heart for it. Gloria agreed without hesitation. That night she updated the lane's website herself. Alongside the event calendar, she added a new section, Garden Classes by Gloria. Simple Saturday morning sessions, teaching how to plant tomatoes, prune roses, compost kitchen scraps. "We'll start with whatever's in your backyard," the blurb read. By the time she finished uploading the photos, the moon had risen, silvering the edges of the oak leaves outside. Late the next afternoon, while she was showing two neighborhood kids how to twist pipe cleaners into makeshift plant ties, a shadow fell across the gate. A man in a dark blazer stood there, a leather portfolio tucked under one arm. "You Gloria Martin?" he asked. She nodded. "I'm a realtor. Thought you might like to know someone nearby is looking to sell." A realtor drops by the lane, saying someone nearby wants to sell. Brent wanted to silence the lane. Now he needs to list his house. The realtor's tone was casual, but the words landed with precision. "It's the Martins across the way. They're planning to move. Could be a job thing, or maybe finances. They haven't." Gloria kept her expression still, the way she did when coaxing a skittish plant out of dry soil. "I see," she said, and nothing more. That night she sat at her kitchen table, the lamplight pooling across a folder already thick with paperwork. Marcia's number glowed on her phone screen. "If I wanted to buy something quietly," Gloria began, "what's the cleanest way to do it?" The lawyer didn't ask who or why, just explained the process. A silent LLC, a nondescript mailing address, an offer that would look like it came from nowhere in particular. Within a week, the papers were signed, and the bid submitted. She didn't hover over her phone, but she didn't turn the ringer off either. When the call came, offer accepted, she let herself exhale into the quiet. The house across from the lane was hers. She walked the perimeter of its small yard the next morning, hands in her coat pockets. The hedges that once felt like barriers now seemed like frames, directing the view straight to the arch that bore her name. By afternoon, the deed had a new owner. Hands that held foundation. Gloria's foundation. A place meant for the work that never made it into family albums, reading circles, food drives, quiet afternoons, teaching a child how to hold a trowel. Lauren found out before the week was over. The text came late at night, her daughter's name lighting the screen like a warning flare. "Why are you obsessed with us?" Gloria read it twice, her thumb hovering over the reply. "I was never obsessed," she typed. Slow and deliberate, "I just stopped disappearing." She set the phone down without waiting for a response. The following days felt oddly still. The house across the street sat empty, its curtains open for the first time in years. Neighbors slowed their cars when passing. Denise stopped by with a thermos of coffee and a smile that said she didn't need the details. She already knew. Gloria began sketching ideas for the property. A second garden, maybe an indoor reading room for winter. She imagined a long table for craft workshops, a row of shelves for donated seeds. The first piece of mail arrived at the new address before she had even unlocked the door. Junk flyers and a grocery coupon book. She tossed them in the recycling bin and turned the key in the lock, letting the door swing open into a space that already felt unburdened. Across the street, the lane caught the afternoon light, its benches and chalk wall busy with the small traces of life she'd fought to keep. That evening, back at her kitchen table, she sorted through her mail, electric bill, seed catalog, and at the bottom an envelope without a printed return address, just a name written in a familiar looping hand. A letter arrives from Lauren's eldest daughter. "I thought I'd lost all of them. Turns out, one was watching." The envelope's paper felt warm from the day's sun, the ink slightly smudged where a hand must have hesitated. Gloria sat at her kitchen table, sliding a finger under the Inside was a single page, lined notebook paper folded neatly into thirds. You were always there, I remember. The handwriting was unpolished, a teenager's deliberate scrawl, but the weight of the words caught her in the chest. It was signed simply, Ellie. The next morning, Gloria wrote back, a short note, an invitation for tea at the Lane. No pressure, just peace. She left it in the mailbox across the street. Ellie came 2 days later, shoulders hunched against the early spring breeze, hair pulled back in a loose braid. Gloria was waiting at the picnic table with a pot of chamomile and 2 mismatched cups. They began with small talk, the weather, school projects, the way the maple near the chalk wall had started to bud, but the conversation loosened as the tea cooled. Ellie asked about Gloria's childhood, the flowers she chose for the beds, the long silences that used to stretch across family dinners. Gloria answered honestly. She spoke about the rhythm of work that was never called work, the way love could be taken for granted, until it frayed at the edges. She told her what unpaid love does to a woman over time, how it wears grooves in her days until she can't see where she ends and the giving begins. Ellie listened without fidgeting, her fingers tracing the rim of her cup. When the sun shifted low enough to spill gold across the table, Ellie asked if she could help plant something before she left. They dug side by side, hands in the soil, their quiet punctuated only by the scrape of the trowel. From then on, Ellie became a regular presence. She showed up with gloves tucked in her backpack, ready to weed, to stack chairs, to sort donated books. She organized the seed packets by color one afternoon, explaining that it looked more inviting that way. Gloria didn't comment, but she left them that way. The weeks slid by, the lane thick with the scent of lilacs and fresh-cut grass. One morning, a moving truck rolled up to the house across the street. Gloria watched from under the arch as boxes were carried out, furniture she'd once dusted during quick favors, framed photos she'd never been asked to stand in. Brent and Lauren emerged last, speaking to the movers, but not looking toward the lane. The SUV door shut with a muted thud. When the engine started, Gloria stepped to the gate. She raised her hand in a slow, deliberate wave. Neither of them waved back, but she kept her hand up until the vehicle turned the corner and disappeared. Ellie was there that afternoon, planting marigolds along the fence. She worked in silence for a while, then looked up, dirt streaking her cheek. Can we make it bigger? They laughed at my garden. Now the city wants to fund a greenhouse. Ellie's question, can we make it big, followed Gloria into the quiet hours of the night and greeted her again with the morning light. By the time her coffee had cooled, she'd sketched the first draft on the back of a seed catalog, a greenhouse for year-round growing, a wider reading circle, and space where every age could work side by side. 2 weeks later, they stood together in the local council chamber, the air smelling faintly of coffee and floor polish. Ellie carried a neat folder of drawings and figures. Gloria carried the Lane's story. She spoke plainly, about the children who found calm here, the parents who lingered over lemonade, the retired hands that had learned to plant again. When Ellie stepped forward, her voice was steady. We'd grow food for the community, she said, and flowers for anyone who needs them. Council members asked about funding, zoning, upkeep. Gloria answered each one without flinching. A month later, the city announced a new grant for intergenerational green spaces, naming the Lane as its first recipient. Soon after, a regional magazine sent a photographer. The feature ran with a full-page image of Gloria and Ellie beneath the arch, surrounded by children holding trowels and watering cans. The headline read, "What grows from silence?" Not long after, a man stopped by the gate. He owned the vacant lot just beyond the rear fence. "If your foundation can use it," he said, "I'll sell at half the market rate." By week's end, the papers were signed. Volunteers came with rakes and wheelbarrows, clearing weeds and lifting rusted cans from the soil. Laughter threaded through the scrape of metal and the rustle of uprooted grass. On planting day, Gloria knelt in the fresh earth with a young oak in her hands. The roots were tender but determined. She set it into the ground, pressing the soil back with slow, deliberate care. Ellie joined her, palms firm over the last mound. Months later, Ellie took the stage at a youth leadership event, her jeans still marked with garden dirt. She spoke without notes, telling the audience that courage wasn't always loud, that sometimes it was steady, patient, and capable of changing everything. She credited her grandmother.
Gloria listened from the crowd.
Her chest warm with something deeper than pride. Requests began arriving, 3 retired women from nearby towns, asking her to help them start spaces of their own. She said yes to all of them, her calendar filling with visits and calls, each one another seed planted. One evening, while adding new photos to the Lane's website, a notification slid into her inbox. The subject line read, "We'd like to nominate you for something special. I was a footnote at family dinners, now I'm the keynote." The email was short and almost suspiciously plain. "We're pleased to inform you that you've been nominated for the State Elder Care Advocate of the Year award." Gloria read it twice, her hand hovering over the mouse, as if the words might vanish if she clicked away. 2 days later, an embossed envelope arrived, an invitation to speak at the State Conference on Aging, Dignity and Land Stewardship. They wanted her on the main stage. Denise was the first to hear the news. She grinned so wide it almost cracked. "Told you the lane was bigger than a patch of dirt." Word spread in other ways too. One afternoon, Gloria opened her inbox to find a name she hadn't seen in months, just heard. "Congrats, Lauren." No signature, no warmth, just the digital equivalent of a nod across a crowded room. Gloria sat with it for a moment before typing back. "Thank you. You chose distance. I chose meaning." She pressed send without a second thought. Ellie heard about the nomination from a teacher who'd read the magazine article. She bounded into the lane the next day, cheeks flushed. "Let me take you to the awards," she said, planting her gloves on her hips. "Just us. We'll make a whole day of it." Gloria agreed. The weeks leading up to the gala were a blur of planning, and politely fending off curious reporters. One evening, Denise appeared at her door with a small velvet box. Inside was a silver bracelet. The words etched deep, "You made the lane," and the legacy. The night of the awards, Ellie drove them in a borrowed sedan, the smell of garden soil lingering faintly from the back seat where seed trays had once rested. At the venue the carpet was thick and the air cool with conditioned air. Gloria stepped onto the stage under warm lights, the microphone catching the timbre of her voice as she spoke about land as anchor, about dignity and aging, about the invisible work that shapes lives. When she finished, the audience rose in unison. The sound of applause swelled until it felt like it could lift her straight from the stage. After the gala, as people milled around in clusters, a familiar figure approached. A woman with silver hair tucked into a scarf, leaning slightly on a cane. "Mabel, the original seller of the lane." "I've been meaning to call," Mabel said, her voice softer than Gloria remembered. "I'm not well. Doctor says I should get my things in order." She reached into her bag and pulled out an envelope. "The last adjoining parcel is still mine. I want it to be yours. You'll use it right." Gloria opened the flap just enough to see the signed letter inside. No conditions, no price, just a gift. Later, after the crowd thinned and Ellie drove them home, Gloria slipped through the lane's gate, the moonlight tracing the arc. She walked past the chalk wall, past the marigolds, past the oak tree they'd planted, until she reached the rough edge of the new parcel. She stood there in the dark, the cool earth under her feet, the paper still warm in her pocket. She looked out over the land, tears in her eyes. "They told me to stay in my lane. I did, and I named it after every woman they forgot." The new parcel opened in early summer, the air thick with bees and the hum of hands working side by side. Gloria had named it the Quiet Work Garden, a space for the women whose names had slipped between the lines of history. Along the winding path, she placed smooth river stones, each engraved with a name and a short line. Mary sewed through the night. Anita fed 6 on little and left. Joan kept the door open. The stones caught the sunlight like small lanterns. Children traced the letters with curious fingers, asking who the women were. Gloria told their stories, never hurrying the word. People began bringing their own contributions, packets of seeds, faded photographs, handwritten notes about a grandmother or an aunt who had kept the world turning quietly. Denise found an old wooden wheelbarrow at a yard sale and painted it soft yellow. They filled it with marigolds and mint. Ellie built a trellis from reclaimed wood, weaving vines through it until it arched overhead like a doorway. By mid-season, the garden had become more than a memorial. It was a place where life went on, potluck tables under the shade, toddlers chasing bubbles, a teenager sketching the oak tree in a worn notebook. In August, Gloria set out a small cardboard box at the lane's entrance. The sign read, "Leave a story, take a seat." By autumn the box was so full she had to start cataloging the letters. That's when the idea for the book came. The Lane Letters, a slim, self-published volume of reflections, stories and quiet truths gathered over the years. She included her own essays too. Lessons on boundaries, the anatomy of giving, and the power of claiming space. Ellie handled the editing and layout, her fingerprints on every page. It was Ellie too who suggested the nonprofit's paperwork be updated to list them both as co-directors. "It's not just your lane anymore," she said one evening, their hands deep in a bed of zinnias. Gloria nodded. It wasn't surrender, it was succession. That winter when the first snow came, they gathered in the quiet work garden, for a not just family though Denise stood at her side and Ellie at her other, but the larger family the lane had grown. Children with chalk-streaked hands, parents with thermoses, elders leaning on canes but smiling while Gloria sat on her bench beneath the hand-carved sign Ellie had made as a surprise. "We were never just helpers." The words seemed to vibrate in the cold air, as solid as the oak beams above her. As the camera clicked, she caught sight of a row of kids kneeling by the stones, brushing snow from the engraved names. They weren't rushing, they weren't being told to, they were simply tending. When the photo was printed later, someone noticed that the bench's shadow stretched all the way to the arch at the lane's entrance, as if the two were joined by something you couldn't see in summer. The following spring, the trees she had planted alone were now part of a forest of gifts from others, saplings, cuttings, seeds carried in paper envelopes. Sitting beneath one of them, the lemonade glass cool in her hand, she could hear the rustle of dozens of conversations, laughter from every direction, the scrape of a trowel in fresh soil, fade out on Gloria sipping lemonade beneath a tree she planted alone, now surrounded by hundreds she inspired.